She was running from a monster, but she ran straight into the arms of the one man who could destroy her. The fire spit and crackled, a lonely star in the vast, crushing darkness of the Wyoming territory. Elena Whitfield huddled close, pulling her thin shawl tighter, but the cold wasn't just in the air, it was in her bones. A deep, settled chill that had been with her for weeks. 3 weeks ago, her world was Boston mansions and silk dresses. A future locked down, sealed with a promise to a man she didn't love. A man with a smile as bright and empty as a polished tombstone. Now her world was this: a travel trunk with a few remaining dollars, a pistol in her pocket she barely knew how to use, and a fear so big it threatened to swallow her whole. The snap of a twig made her heart leap into her throat. Her hand shot to the pistol. It was small, but it felt heavy, deadly. "Stay where you are," she commanded, her voice a dry rasp. A figure stepped out of the shadows, hands raised. The firelight painted his face in lines and scars. He was a man made of hard miles and harder country. "Evening, ma'am," he said, his voice deep, like rocks rolling downhill. "Not safe for a lady out here alone." "I'm managing," she lied. He looked at the pistol in her trembling hand, then back at her face. A corner of his mouth twitched. "I can see that. Mind if I share your fire?" She didn't want to. Every instinct screamed at her to say no. Men in this wild country were just another kind of predator. But the night was long, and the howl of a distant coyote reminded her she was on the menu. "Keep your distance," she said, her voice tight. He nodded once, moving with a slow, deliberate grace that didn't calm her nerves at all. He settled on the other side of the fire. The flames danced between them. "Patrick Callahan," he said. "Rancher, the Double Cross, about 40 miles east." "Elena Whitfield," she offered, giving nothing more. He pulled some jerky from his saddlebag and held it out. She took it. The salt and smoke were the best things she'd tasted in days. They ate in a silence that felt heavy, loaded. He broke it. "You're a long way from Boston," he said, nodding at the faded label on her trunk. Her blood ran cold. How did he know? She hadn't said a word. He was watching her too closely, seeing too much. "You're an observant man, Mr. Callahan." "Out here," he said, his voice dropping low, "observation keeps a man alive." He looked her straight in the eye then, his gaze so intense it felt like he was pinning her to the spot. "You know, Miss Whitfield," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "my heart's been looking for yours." The words hit her like a punch to the gut. It wasn't a compliment. It wasn't a pickup line. It was a threat. This man wasn't a random stranger. He hadn't just stumbled upon her fire. He had been looking for her. And now, he had found her. Elena's mind raced. This was a trap. She'd run 1,000 miles from one monster, only to land in the arms of another. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, her voice shaking, her hand tightening on the pistol hidden in her skirt. Patrick Callahan just smiled, a slow, patient smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Don't you? A woman leaves a Boston banking heir at the altar, disappears with a trunk full of his private investment papers. That kind of story travels fast, even out here." He knew everything. The arranged marriage, the fiancé, Frederick Harrington, the escape. But the papers, that was a secret no one was supposed to know. She'd taken them as insurance, proof of Frederick's dirty dealings, enough to keep him from sending men after her. Clearly it hadn't worked. "Are you one of his?" she asked, her voice cold as ice. "A bounty hunter?" "Let's just say I'm a concerned party," he said smoothly. "Frederick is an old business acquaintance. He's very eager to get his property back." The way he said property made her skin crawl. "I'm not his property," she spat. And those papers prove he's a thief and a liar. Maybe so, Patrick said with a shrug. But out here, proof is just a story, and the man with the most guns usually writes the ending. He leaned forward, the firelight casting demonic shadows on his face. Give me the papers, Elena. I'll see that you get a head start before his other men find you. Other men. So he wasn't alone. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She was cornered. And if I refuse? He sighed, a theatrical sound of disappointment. Then my job gets a little messier, and your journey ends right here. She believed him. There was a coldness in his eyes, a casual brutality that told her he'd seen death before. Probably caused it. But she hadn't come this far to just give up. Thinking fast, she reached for the coffee pot sitting by the fire. More coffee, Mr. Callahan? She asked, her voice suddenly sweet, trembling just enough to sound scared. He watched her, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. He nodded slowly. She poured the steaming, black liquid, not into his cup, but straight into his face. He roared, a sound of pure agony, clawing at his eyes as the scalding coffee did its work. Elena didn't wait. She scrambled backward, pulling the pistol from her skirt. She fired once, the shot cracking through the night. Not at him. At the rope holding his magnificent chestnut horse. The horse, spooked by the shot and freed from its tether, bolted into the darkness. She didn't look back. She just ran, plunging into the trees, the sound of Patrick Callahan's furious, pain-filled curses chasing her into the night. She ran until her lungs burned and her legs gave out. She collapsed at the edge of a small creek, gasping for air, the sounds of pursuit fading behind her. She was alive. She was free. For now. But she'd made a powerful enemy, and she'd just stranded him in the middle of nowhere. A man like that wouldn't just get angry. He would get even. She spent a miserable night huddled in a thicket, jumping at every shadow, the pistol clutched in her hand. By dawn, she was moving again, following the creek, hoping it led toward civilization. Toward Willow Creek, the town where a teaching position was waiting for her, her one chance at a new life. She stumbled into the small settlement 2 days later, looking more like a wild animal than a Boston lady. Her dress was torn, her face was scratched, and her eyes were wide with exhaustion. The first person she met was the town doctor, a man named James Wilson. He had kind eyes and a gentle manner that immediately put her on edge. She'd learned that the kindest faces often hid the sharpest teeth. "You must be Miss Whitfield," he said with a warm smile. "We've been expecting you. You look like you've had a rough journey." "You could say that," she said, her voice a hoarse whisper. He led her to the small rooms behind the schoolhouse that would be her new home. It was clean, simple, and for the first time in weeks, she felt a flicker of hope. Maybe she could disappear here. Maybe she could be safe. But the West has a way of reminding you that safety is just a story you tell yourself between disasters. A week later, just as she was starting to believe she might have actually escaped, a familiar figure rode into town. Patrick Callahan. His face was red and blistered from the sun and the coffee burns, but the cold fury in his eyes was unmistakable. He didn't come for her right away. He was smart. He took a room at the hotel. He spoke to the townsfolk. He smiled, and every time she saw him, his eyes would lock onto hers with a chilling promise. "I haven't forgotten." The whole town was buzzing about him. A handsome, wealthy rancher. So charming, so polite. Dr. Wilson seemed particularly taken with him. They spent hours talking in the hotel dining room, laughing like old friends. Elena felt like a mouse being circled by a patient cat. He was turning the town against her before he even made his move. He was isolating her, making sure that when he struck, no one would believe her side of the story. One evening, there was a knock at her door. It was him. "We need to talk," he said, his voice low. "We have nothing to talk about," she said, trying to slam the door. He blocked it with his boot. "Don't we?" he asked, pushing his way inside. "You have something of mine, Elena. The papers, and I have something of yours." He held up a small silver locket. Her mother's. She hadn't even realized it was missing. "You're a monster," she breathed. "No," he said, his voice dangerously soft. "I'm a businessman, and Frederick Harrington pays his debts." He took a step closer. "The papers, Elena, or your new life in this charming little town goes up in smoke, starting with your good friend, Dr. Wilson." The threat hung in the air, cold and sharp. He knew the doctor had been kind to her. He knew Wilson was her only real ally in this town, and he was willing to destroy him to get what he wanted. The game had changed. This wasn't just about escape anymore. It was about who would burn first. Elena felt the walls closing in. Patrick Callahan had her trapped, and he was slowly, methodically tightening the noose. Every friendly face in Willow Creek now seemed like a potential spy. Every kind word felt like a lie. Dr. Wilson continued to be a gentleman, bringing her books from his personal library and inviting her for supper. But now, his kindness felt like a liability, a weakness Patrick could exploit. "You seem troubled, Miss Whitfield," the doctor said one evening as they sat on his porch. "It's just, this town is very different from Boston," she lied. "Give it time," he said with a warm smile. "You'll find your place here." But would she? Callahan was a shadow at the edge of her vision, a constant, unnerving presence. He never approached her directly again, but she could feel his eyes on her whenever she was in town. He was waiting, letting the pressure build. She knew she couldn't give him the papers. They were her only leverage, the only thing keeping Frederick Harrington's full wrath at bay. But if she didn't, what would Callahan do to Dr. Wilson? She was caught, a classic checkmate. A few days later, a package arrived for her on the stagecoach. There was no return address. Inside, nestled in cotton, was a single, perfect, pressed Edelweiss. A cold dread washed over her. It was Frederick's signature flower. He used to send them to her in Boston. It wasn't a gift, it was a message. "I know where you are," the message was clear. Callahan wasn't just a hired gun. He was part of Frederick's inner circle. This was more than business. This was personal. That night, she made a decision. She couldn't stay here and wait for the axe to fall. She couldn't put Dr. Wilson in danger. She had to run again. She packed a small bag, taking only what she could carry. She wrote a short note to the school board, saying she had a family emergency and had to leave immediately. It was a lie, but it was kinder than the truth. Under the cover of a moonless night, she slipped out of her small rooms and headed for the livery stable. She would steal a horse and ride north, disappear into the territories where even a man like Callahan couldn't find her. The stable was dark and quiet, the air thick with the smell of hay and leather. She found a sturdy-looking mare and was trying to figure out the saddle straps when a voice from the shadows made her jump. "Leaving so soon?" It was Patrick Callahan. He stepped out of the darkness, a lantern in one hand. The light cast long, dancing shadows, making his face look like a demonic mask. "I had a feeling you might try this," he said, his voice calm, almost conversational. "It's what you do, isn't it? You run." "Stay away from me," she warned, fumbling for the pistol in her bag. He just sighed, a sound of weary patience. "We both know you're not going to shoot me, Elena, and we both know there's nowhere you can run where Frederick won't find you." He took a step closer. "He's not a man who likes to lose, and he considers you his most prized possession." Rage, hot and sharp, cut through her fear. "I am not a possession." "Tell him that," Patrick said with a shrug. "But first, You're going to give me those papers." He lunged. She was ready. She swung her heavy bag, catching him in the side of the head. He grunted in pain and staggered back. It bought her a few seconds. She scrambled up into the hayloft, her heart pounding. She heard him moving below, his footsteps slow and deliberate. He was enjoying this. The hunt. "You can't hide forever," he called up. She crawled deeper into the hay, her hands searching for a weapon, anything. Her fingers closed around the sharp tines of a pitchfork. He was climbing the ladder now. She could hear the rungs creaking under his weight. She held her breath, waiting. His head appeared over the edge of the loft. In the dim lantern light, she saw something she hadn't noticed before. A long, thin scar that ran from his temple down to his jaw, almost hidden by his stubble. He pulled himself up into the loft and stood, brushing the hay from his clothes. He saw the pitchfork in her hands and actually chuckled. "Really, Elena? A pitchfork?" He took a step toward her, and she jabbed it forward. He sidestepped it easily, grabbing the handle and twisting it from her grasp. He tossed it aside. "It's over," he said, grabbing her arm. His grip was like iron. "It's not over until I'm dead," she spat, struggling against him. "That can be arranged," he said, his voice cold. But then he froze. His eyes were fixed on something just past her shoulder. His grip loosened. "What is that?" he whispered. She followed his gaze. Carved into the thick wooden beam behind her were two sets of initials, surrounded by a crude heart. "PC plus MW. What does it mean?" she asked, confused. Patrick Callahan stared at the carving, his face a mask of shock and disbelief. The cold fury in his eyes was replaced by something else, something that looked like heartbreak. "My God," he breathed. "William." Suddenly the doors of the stable burst open. Dr. Wilson stood there, flanked by two rough-looking men, and the kind, gentle doctor was holding a gun. "I was wondering when you'd finally figure it out, Callahan," Wilson said with a smile that was anything but kind. "It's a shame, really. I was starting to like her." The world tilted on its axis. The kind doctor, her only friend. He wasn't her ally. He was the final piece of the trap. The letters carved into the beam were a ghost from the past. PC plus MW. Patrick Callahan. And Mary Wilson, the doctor's wife. "What is this?" Elena demanded, her voice shaking as she looked from the doctor's gun to Patrick's stunned face. "This," Dr. Wilson said with a cruel smile, "is what happens when you get in the way of progress." He gestured with his gun toward Patrick. "My wife was a sentimental fool. She fell for your brother, William, a simple rancher with dirt under his nails. Can you imagine?" Patrick stared at the initials, the pieces of a puzzle he never knew existed, clicking into place. His brother, William, hadn't died of pneumonia 3 winters ago. He'd been in love with the doctor's wife. "She was going to leave me for him," Wilson continued, his voice dripping with venom. "Take our son and run off to live in that dusty hovel you call a ranch. I couldn't allow that. It would have been a scandal. Bad for my reputation. Bad for business." "What business?" Patrick growled, his hand inching toward the knife in his boot. "The business of this town, my dear Callahan," Wilson said. "The railroad is coming through, and the survey plans just happen to put the main depot right on your land. Your Double Cross Ranch is about to become the most valuable piece of property in this territory. Frederick Harrington and I have been planning this for years. The whole scheme laid bare. It wasn't just about Elena's papers. It was about Patrick's land. Frederick, the fiancé she ran from, was partners with the kind doctor. They had orchestrated everything." "My brother," Patrick said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "What did you do to him?" Wilson shrugged. "Accidents happen on the frontier. A fall from a horse, a sudden fever. Who's to say? Mary was devastated, of course. She never suspected a thing. Died of a broken heart a year later, the poor dear. The lie was so perfect, so complete. Patrick had mourned his brother for 3 years, never knowing he'd been murdered. "And you," Wilson said, turning his cold eyes to Elena. "You were the perfect pawn. We knew you'd run. We just had to make sure you ran in the right direction, to the one man who had what we needed, but who was too stubborn to sell." He gestured to Patrick. "We sent him after you, knowing he'd bring you back here. The plan was for him to get the papers, dispose of you, and then we would. Dispose of him, the heartbroken rancher, taking his own life after the loss of his new love. A tragic story. And I would have been there to console the town and buy up his land for pennies on the dollar." Elena felt sick. She hadn't been running toward a new life. She had been herded like a lamb to the slaughter. "It's a shame you found that little carving," Wilson said with a sigh. "It complicates things." He raised his gun. "No matter. A stable fire covers a lot of sins." But he had miscalculated. He thought Patrick was just a heartbroken rancher. He didn't know about the war. He didn't know about the cold, deadly focus that could settle over a man who had nothing left to lose. Patrick moved. It wasn't a lunge, it was an explosion. He threw himself sideways, tackling Elena and pulling her down into the hay just as Wilson's gun roared, the bullet splintering the beam where their heads had been. The 2 hired guns charged forward. The stable erupted into chaos. One of them grabbed Elena, holding a knife to her throat. The other went for Patrick. But Patrick wasn't fighting like a rancher. He was fighting like a soldier. A scout. He moved with a brutal efficiency that was terrifying to watch. He broke the first man's arm with a sickening crack, then drove his knife into the man's gut. Wilson fired again, wildly this time, the shot going high. He was a man of poison and plots, not gunfights. He was losing control. The man holding Elena tightened his grip. "Drop it, Callahan, or she dies." Patrick froze, his eyes locked on the blade at Elena's throat. "Let her go," he said, his voice deadly calm. "This is between me and him." "There is no you and him," Wilson shrieked, his composure shattering. "There is only what I want." That was his mistake. He took his eyes off Elena for a split second. She reacted on pure instinct. She stomped down hard on her captor's instep with the heel of her boot. He yelped in pain, his grip loosening just for a second. It was all she needed. She slammed her head back into his face, the crunch of his nose echoing in the small space. She broke free, scrambling away as Patrick lunged, not at the man she'd disabled, but at Wilson. They crashed to the ground. The gun went skittering across the floorboards. Elena dove for it. She came up with the heavy Colt in her hands, turning just as Wilson shoved Patrick off him and staggered to his feet. His eyes were wide with disbelief and fury. He saw the gun in her hand. "You wouldn't," he sneered. "You're just a schoolteacher." The man with the broken nose was getting to his feet, pulling another knife. Patrick was still on the ground, reaching for his own. Elena didn't hesitate. She remembered the cold weight of the pistol in her hand that first night. She remembered Patrick's words, "Point and squeeze the trigger." She fired. The shot was deafening in the enclosed space. Dr. James Wilson, the respected town physician, the man with the kind eyes, crumpled to the floor, a look of shocked surprise on his face. The second man froze, seeing his boss go down. He looked at Elena, at the smoking gun in her hand, at Patrick getting to his feet, his face a mask of cold fury. He dropped his knife and ran, disappearing into the night. Silence descended on the stable, thick with the smell of gunpowder and blood. It was over. Patrick walked over to her, gently taking the gun from her trembling hands. He looked at Wilson's body, then back at her. "You saved my life," he said, his voice filled with a quiet awe. "You saved mine first," she whispered. He pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. She buried her face in his chest, the adrenaline finally giving way to a bone-deep exhaustion. They stood there for a long time, two survivors in the ruins of a dozen lies. The town of Willow Creek was never the same. The truth came out, a slow, ugly flood. The story of Dr. Wilson's greed, of Frederick Harrington's corruption, of a murder that had been disguised as an accident. The railroad still came, but it didn't bring the ruin Wilson had planned. With his crimes exposed, the land claims were re-evaluated. The Double Cross Ranch was safe. Patrick and Elena testified at the territorial inquest. Her papers, the ones she had guarded so fiercely, became the final nail in Frederick Harrington's coffin. His empire, built on lies and stolen land, came crashing down. They returned to Willow Creek, not as a rancher and a school teacher, but as two people who had faced down their ghosts together, and won. One evening, months later, they stood on the porch of the Double Cross Ranch house, watching the sun set over the rolling hills. The new schoolhouse, built with Patrick's money and Elena's design, was nearly complete in the valley below. "What you said that first night," Elena said softly, leaning her head on his shoulder. "About your heart looking for mine." He smiled, wrapping an arm around her. "I think it knew something I didn't," he admitted. "It knew it was looking for a home." She turned to face him, her eyes shining. "Did it find one?" "It did," he said, his voice rough with emotion. He pulled the small silver locket from his pocket, her mother's locket, which he'd kept safe all this time. He opened it and placed it in her hand. "I think we both did." The story of the Boston school teacher and the quiet rancher became a legend in Willow Creek. A story about how sometimes the most dangerous journey isn't the one across a wild country, but the one you take toward another person's heart. It's a story that proves that even in the darkest of nights, a single spark of trust can light a fire big enough to burn down a world of lies and build a new one from the ashes. If you believe that the truth is always worth fighting for, no matter the cost, do us a favor and hit that subscribe button. You never know when the next great story is just around the corner.